So our second recording is for diversity of Cnidarians. And Cnidarians are composed of hydroids, jellyfish, sea anemones, and corals. You probably have know what jellyfish, sea anemones, and corals are. Here is a sea anemone. Here is a coral. This is called the coral head, and inside this coral head, if you were to look, there's actually all these coral polyps. So what you're looking at is a bunch of coral polyps. But hydroids are actually a much smaller version, similar to jellyfish. They live in colonies, and they, have are part of this group, even though they're not as common. Some of the characteristics of these organisms include that they are obviously multicellular, and they are heterotrophic. They are from the phylum Cnidaria, and that means that if you look at this at our cladogram, so we already covered sponges, so we're moving to tissues and radial symmetry. So remember that radial symmetry is similar to a bicycle that you can take and put different planes that divide it in multiple locations. Radial symmetry means that you can actually split these organisms in multiple planes of symmetry. Okay, so their body structure, they also have two stages of life. So they have the polyp, and the second stage is the medusa. And so different organisms may have a predominant stage, similar to the alternation of generations, where they go between two stages, and that some plants are more more likely to be in one stage than another. They are so when they are in the medusa stage, they're floating, and usually when at some point they are sessile, and they all the Cnidarians have stinging abilities. Very interesting is that these organisms have tentacles called cnidocytes, and they work like a harpoon. So there's these cnidocytes have this stored barb, and they're basically react when they're touched. They come out like a harpoon and sting or pierce through their their enemy. So these capsules are called nematocysts, and they hold the poison, and they hold the harpoon. I'm sorry, that is contained in these organisms. So right now we're gonna watch a quick video on how these organisms eat.
Lining its tentacles are millions of special capsules called nematocysts. Inside the capsules lie thread-like projectiles loaded with deadly poisons. When unleashed, these weapons fire with the acceleration of a rifle bullet. They pierce their target and pump it full of paralyzing toxins. The tentacles must be touched before the weapons can discharge, and for that, the prey must come to the anemone. Its plant-like appearance perfectly conceals its very deadly intent. In silent ambush, the anemone awaits its prey. For the goby, one unguarded moment could be fatal. Dragging the fish into its mouth, the anemone devours it with tools invented by its ancient ancestors. The goby will be slowly digested alive.
So as you guys can see, it's a pretty effective, harsh, but effective way of eating. So the gas in that gastrovascular cavity, the enzymes are released that basically break down the organism, and when that happens, you have the organism slowly breaks it down. Obviously, it's not killing the organism. It's just has been harped, but with venom. But it's not to kill it. It's to like stun them. So it's a pretty cruel but effective way. And the way that this triggers is by touch. So this is the thing about these organisms, is that they have a nervous system. So if you imagine a network of nerve endings throughout the entire organism, that's how it knows where its prey is and where it needs to hunt. So it has a much more advanced system than the ones prior, with the nervous system that basically travels through the entire organism. So the two body forms that we talked about are basically called polyp and medusa, as I said. They release, so here's the medusa stage. In the medusa stage, they can release either eggs or sperm. And these eggs or sperm basically is fertilization that is external, come and they form a zygote, and then the zygote basically travels, and so this is their stage where they're moving. The larva moves and settles down somewhere. So at this point, this polyp becomes stationary, so it becomes sessile. This polyp is called asexual reproduction, because what happens is this polyp will now make a bunch of medusas from the same polyp that was just that grew. So it's this stage is sexual reproduction, and this stage is asexual reproduction. It can also reproduce by budding, as you guys can see here. And you probably have seen SpongeBob bud before. So different animals, as I said before, different animals have different processes. So a jellyfish, for example, is most dominant, found in a medusa stage, but a sea anemone is most commonly found in the polyp. Is a polyp dominant stage, even though it does release medusas. What else did I want to tell you guys? One more thing. These organisms are hermaphroditic, so they can produce eggs and sperm that can be released. They can produce both, many of them. Okay, so one important factor for us to learn about these cnidarians is coral reefs. Coral reefs are one of the richest areas in the ocean that you can find. Coral provides a lot of homes to different organisms. It promotes life. It is coral itself is in a relationship, a mutualistic relationship with Zooxanthella. Zooxanthella is an organism, a plant-like organism that lives in the coral and gives the coral its color. They is similar to lichen, where there's like two organisms that basically provide food and shelter. So the coral reef provides shelter to the zooxanthella, and in return, the zooxanthella provides food to the coral. Um, so coral is built with calcium carbonate, which is a material that is found from other, decomposing animals in the ocean. And what happens is, like many shell animals that also use carbonate, um, they are very sensitive to ocean temperature, ocean acidification, and these materials cannot be built properly when there's a high acid levels or high pollution in the environment. So here's an example of the basically the structure of the coral, and then the zooxanthella are tiny organisms living in there, but the skeleton is made out of calcium carbonate. So what happens is, when the coral gets stressed, it is not able to absorb this calcium carbonate that the zooxanthella is making. So the zooxanthella leave, causing what we call coral bleaching. Coral bleaching is basically when the coral turns white. Remember that the zooxanthella gives the coral its color. So once the zooxanthella leave, basically it leaves the coral leaving white. And this is an example of what it looks like when you have coral bleaching. So that's our so things that you can do for to prevent coral bleaching is basically reduce the amount of fossil fuels that we're using. So that means if you could leave your lights off when you're not using them, if you can walk or use public transportation, or use commute transportation rather than using that you guys travel, minimize the amount of travel that you do. All those things basically reduce the amount of carbon fossil fuels that we're using. Anything that uses energy or electricity pretty much in our country is being driven by fossil fuels. And so there's a lot of concerns in the scientific community. Basically, the Great Barrier Reef in Australia is getting wiped out. We're losing reefs, like 70 or 80% of the reefs are being lost due to coral bleaching. So we really need to be conscientious of what we do